Thank you, everybody, and particularly to Lionel for the invitation. It is probably closest to Cambridge I'll ever get, and probably the last time. And my apologies to Nick for busting and rather late and disrupting the beginning. Can everybody in the back of the room hear you? Good. That's a very helpful thing. Listen, to begin with, I'm going to pose you a little question. Anybody in this room not heard a piece of music in the last 24 hours, feel free to put your hand up. Since I became chief executive at UK Music 4 years ago, I've probably been asked that question, feels like 59,000 times. There's never been one single occasion that anybody has ever put their hand up. Now just think about when you consume music in the modern world, how you do listen to it. On the radio, in the shower, you make waterproof radios these days, on your iPod, streamed, downloaded, CDs, vinyl. And by the way, just to get into this, sales of vinyl records are up 40% last year. So much for technology. I am going to kind of argue that there probably has been no better time in history to be a fan of music. I went to the Mercury Awards a couple of weeks ago. There were 10 artists, all of whom have very clear ideas artistically of who they are, what they want to do. They can get up on the stage, they can do it in time, live, for real, based on nothing but their raw talent and ability. I went straight home from the Grosvenor House Hotel, downloaded the Anna Kelvey album, downloaded the King Crimson album. Personally, it blew me away. And an hour after getting home, there I am sitting with both those albums on my iPod, being played up on my stereo. How fantastic is all of that? And I was really, really pleased to hear my reception at the back of the room. Because I know Lionel's going to lecture you at length over coming years about the statue of Queen Anne. It's not true. Because as it transpires, it was the Irish who invented copyright. See, he's going to really argue with me. I'll really love this evening. See under a man called King Dermot of Tara, 560, involving two monks having a row. One came back from Rome with a book, and bear in mind this is the 6th century, so a book is a rare, extraordinary, wondrous thing. And a second monk, and it was Maville, by the way, if it's any consolation, who quietly took that book and copied it. Just started an absolutely unbelievably furious row. Because the owner of that book and the owner of a monastery probably thought he was on a bit of a money-making scheme. This is the 6th century. Pilgrims traipsing across Europe to come and see his book in his monastery. So he was pretty bloody unhappy that there was this copy existed. And this argument ended up in front of the High King of Ireland, who in my native language, passing his Solomon-like judgment, proclaimed Lagach bo aboin, lagach lower al or roughly translated into English, to every cow belongs its calf, and to every book belongs its copy. And that was 1,500 years before Queen Anne was even going to get around to thinking about these kind of things. And in many ways, that for me is the seed of copyright. The thing that sits at the center of this whole debate discussion, online, offline, digital, DRM, actually we constantly overlook the most important thing in all of it, the creator. Without which, none of the rest of it matters. And for me, what copyright brings into all of this is this notion, and it's an extraordinary thing, that there is this globally recognized system that identifies that unique moment of creativity, whether that's a song, the lyric, the melody, the text on a page, a drawing, a movie, a video game, an animation, a photograph, a painting. King, pauper, millionaire, receiving supplementary benefit, copyright treats you all with the same respect and reverence. And it is from that simple concept that we have developed in the modern world what we now refer to as the creative industries. Clearly in the UK, as it turns out, it's something we're quite good at, this being creative thing. Music, film, fashion designs, playwrights, poets, novelists, photographers, painters. We actually can genuinely, as a nation, get astonishingly jingoistic. By way of example, there are a mere 3 countries in the world that are net exporters of music, that actually create a surplus. North America is number 1. The UK is number 2. And that's not some recent accident, by the way, that's a long, consistent thing. Because thank God, generation after generation of young British artists get up and make music that the rest of the world fall passionately, deeply in love with, and are prepared to make the biggest acknowledgement of all, and that is part of their hard earnings and buying that music. Now, if by the time I leave this room, and I will allow you your laptops and your iPods and iPhones and everything else, by the time I leave this room, if anybody can tell me who number 3 is on that list, I will send you a nice little selection of CDs or music or something interesting over the next couple of days. Now, why does all of that matter? Well, as it turns out in the UK, this thing called copyright underpins, supports, nurtures, holds together about 6.4% of our GDP as a nation. And it holds together about 2 million jobs in the United Kingdom. And to put that in plain English with you, that puts this notion of creativity right up there, along with the construction industry, pension industry, insurance industry, financial services. And I have to mind, it tickles me. When some people think about music, and perhaps somewhat dismissively, might think that it's really nothing more than a couple of kids making noise in the back room of a pub on a Friday night. Well, as it transpires, when those kids grow up to be big boys and girls, their contribution to this nation and to every single person living in it is just as vital, significant, and important as a law graduate leaving Cambridge University and working for an international law firm in the City of London. I love the idea of that. We thankfully move on as a music industry, and we will move on because of our creators will demand it of us and send us in that direction. Now, Lionel touched upon UK music. UK music to this day is still unique anywhere in the world. It is the one place and the one table in the world where the entire thing that is a nation's commercial music industry sits around a single table. And as Lionel has described, that does include the artists, the composers, the writers, the performers, the musicians and their representatives, the managers, the record companies, multinationals, independents, music publishers, collection societies, the music producers, and indeed all of the British music industry. All of this wondrous, glorious thing that is the second largest net exporter of music in the world. It does make the discussion around my boardroom table quite fascinating, very dynamic. And as Lionel and I think Nick knows and can testify to, if there's a place where you want lots of opinions, you can always start in the music industry because everybody has an opinion. Now, all of this curiously faces us with something of a paradox in the modern world. And that is this notion of technology. Digital disruption. Oh, and the chilling effect of copyright on technology. I love those words, the chilling effect of technology. 120 years ago, my industry consisted of people generating sheet music. And I'm oversimplifying this, but it's the painted picture. The music industry consisted of people queuing outside a shop in Piccadilly Circus, buying sheet music copy of the latest musical hit. And at the time, there were genuine, globally recognizable household names. It's identifiable as Ford cars and Coca-Cola. Along comes a guy called Thomas Alva Edison, invents a thing called the phonogram, and boy, did he turn that industry on its head. Within a single generation, sales of phonograms were reaching 75 million units in North America, and that was 1926. Devastated that industry. By the way, music publishing is still alive and well, and in the next couple of days we will announce about 9% growth globally last year, year on year. Radio came along in the late 1920s. Oh, let me remember. Music that is free at the point of consumption for consumers, supported by advertising in between. That could be tied to any new, to quote, new business models on the internet right now. I think you'll find commercial radio in North America has been doing that since the early 1930s when it first began to take traction. Hold that the music at the point of consumption is free from the consumer, supported by the adverts in between the music. Some of us are old enough to remember the impact of vinyl, that spin-off of the Second World War had on rock and roll, cassettes in the 1970s, CDs in the 1980s, and now the internet in the 1990s and the noughties. There's a pattern. Anybody hasn't noticed? Every single major growth period in the entire history of my industry happened to coincide with the introduction of some new form of technology, some new form of delivery for that music. On every single occasion, it was disruptive to the predecessors in some way, shape, or form. This one's no different. But guess what? 120 years later, my industry's still here. And it's actually in reasonably robust, good shape. And no matter what an awful lot of the futurists might tell you, personally I think the future has overtaken the futurists. Because my industry is actually in an extraordinary, unique position. There is nothing that is ever going to prevent, stop, or demotivate a young person from picking up a musical instrument, a piece of technology, and wanting to be creative and make music. In fact, I think at times probably a good bit of prohibition is actually very stimulating for that kind of thing. And I'm utterly convinced, because I know right now as we're sitting in this room, there is some young person in a spare bedroom, in a council estate in Doncaster, that's got the next best song you've ever heard in your life already written. At the other side of the equation, are we all suddenly going to stop liking music? It's never going to happen. We love it. We consume it. We're passionate about it. We're surrounded by it. We want to wake up by it. We want to listen to it. We want to work by it. We want to go out and have a good time by it. We want to make love to it. We want to wake up again and have it. It's in our lives. I cannot think of another single industry that has pretty much absolute certainty over both ends of its supply chain. The bit in the middle changes. Has changed, did change, will change. That is nothing to be afraid of. And by the way, as a point of reference, the independent record companies would be very unhappy with me if I didn't say this. They actually did license Napster 10 years ago. Now, where does all that leave us? Well, it leaves people like Lyle and me being kept very busy discussing philosophy and the machine. In the next couple of weeks, and by that the estimate I get is anywhere from next week until Christmas, government will issue what I'm now told is a document that is well in excess of 100 pages and counting, which will be government's consultation document to introduce some ideas that will reform elements of copyright throughout the UK. It's going to keep an awful lot of people very busy. I suspect Rachel may be coming in here on occasion and drop it in front of you lot and going, well, you've got 2 hours, what's the answer? Because I'm going to be doing that with my board. We can prepare answers, see if we come up with better answers. It's a strange one. Because it's something that actually didn't get off to the best start. Now, if you calculate this, and if you're talking to a man, then it's actually very comfortable that life changes. And life evolves. Nothing stays constant. And things do reshape. And if you go to the business school, they'll tell you it's one of the things you must be constantly aware of as a manager, that whatever policy, strategy, plan you've developed is still fit for the environment you find yourself operating in that morning, that afternoon, that week, that year. And if the environment changes, the context changes, change your strategy. Just because you come up with a plan doesn't mean you have to stick with it. Just because you came up with copyright that looked like that does not mean you have to stick with it 40 years later. It can and will change. The unfortunate bit was that this particular bout of discussion, review of copyright, and just so you're aware, in the last 5 years, by our reckoning, between Brussels and Whitehall, between white papers, green papers, consultations, discussion documents, blue sky thinking, this one made the 26th. And that doesn't include GARS, by the way. Nor did it include the formation of the European Copyright Directive 10 years ago, whatever on earth that was. This one was launched by the Prime Minister of this country, standing up and blatantly saying, and it's there, you can look it up, that the founders of Google told them that Google would have never established itself in the UK because of UK copyright law. You can guess how that went down in a bunch of industries employing 2 million people and generating 6.4% of GDP. And I think it's fair to say my little switchboard and my phone extension just lit up. It didn't go down well, as people saw it as an openly hostile attack. And that's kind of curious. Because ironically, in terms of the music industry, technology has always needed content, and content has always needed technology. We have always had this symbiotic relationship. It's the bit that Apple has nailed that nobody else has quite got to. Let's face it, the first time we looked at an iPod, we all just stood there and went, I don't know what the hell that does, but if it looks like that, I'd quite like one, thanks very much. 10 years later, I remind myself of what's really important about it. It's got all my favourite tunes on it. And it makes that bloody 40 minutes I have to sit in the Northern Line in North London every morning and get into work just a tiny bit more pleasurable than the miserable experience that it is. Because it's got all my favourite tunes. It was the perfect marriage of phenomenal technology with phenomenal content. And that's the bit that we have to get. Which is now led us to the whole discussion about digital rights management, databases, format shifting, parody. Did you know, apparently, by the way, we're not a funny country? It's true, because the government document says so. It says we need an exception to parody. Because we're not funny. Lila will tell you, under the European Copyright Directive, there are 22 list of exceptions, of which parody is one. And you can read this economic impact study that comes with government's response back in August. It's a fascinating document. Because it reckons by tweaking copyright, we are going to deliver £7.9 billion worth of growth to the British economy. 7.9 billion. Damn, that's a lot of money. Now apparently 500 million of that, 600 million of that is going to come from parody. If we introduce a parody exception. Holy shit. And particularly from exporting television programs, comedy programs. And if we introduce an exception to parody, we'll all be better scriptwriters, make funnier programs, and we can sell lots more of them around the rest of the world. Clearly written by somebody who has never had the pleasure of sitting in a hotel in North America late at night and seeing endless bloody reruns of Benny Hill from 1973, or indeed Monty Python, or indeed what reminding themselves what the Americans did to Spitting Image, or indeed The Office, when they bought it and decided to remodel it in their vision, and on and on and on. Because curiously, the independent television companies in the UK last year had their 5th successive year of growth. And in fact, in terms of exports, had their most successful year ever last year. And actually, that totaled £248 million worth of business. So apparently, by introducing an exception to parody, you know, there's a bit more here. You've got a hot take coming. Say you're going to leave it. In the middle of all of that is this notion of DRM. Now, when I was first asked about DRM, there's 2 ways to look at this. This thing is incredibly detailed, touched upon. Digital rights management, something that would control the environment with which you use to consume music. Theories are fantastic things. They're really good. And then there's a bit in the middle that kind of keeps messing with things. Ask any economist. Actually, there's nothing better. Get 2 economists in the room and ask them the same question. Man, there's a discussion on going for 5 weeks. And they'll still get it wrong because there's a bit in the middle that keeps messing up with all these theories, and that's public human brain. Because we're cantankerous, we're awkward, we like to kind of do what everybody else does on occasions, but quite often we just want to do our own thing. So the reality is, and always was, the market will dictate DRM. As Nick's already highlighted, this notion that you can lock it down completely, well, people and their spending power and the money in their pockets soon fix that idea. We're not doing it. But that's not to say people reject it all the time. Because as we speak this week, we live in a world where actually you've got choice. And what I mean by that, there was one company that the last time I checked had has the credit card details of 200 million people from all around the world, and whose consumers have just downloaded the 16 billionth piece of music that does contain a form of DRM. And that company's called Apple. Because you can now take an MP3 file and put it on your iPod. That's good. But if you download an iTunes, it authorizes that tune to be played on 5 other Apple devices of your choosing. Your computer, your laptop, your iPhone, your iPod, whatever it is. So when people tell me DRM's bad, we all hate it, we don't like it, well, go bloody well tell that to Apple. Because there are 200 million people that have handed over the credit card details to iTunes who have now downloaded over 16 billion tracks. They don't seem remotely bothered by it at all. I've spent endless hours of my life surrounded in recording studios full of millions and millions of pounds worth of state-of-the-art recording equipment, fussing over the most obscure detail that I knew no man in the street was ever going to hear or could care less about. I can actually go to other websites, other services, and download tracks without DRM, and sometimes cheaper. But I keep using iTunes because it's really easy and it works really well. As a consumer, I'm lazy like everybody else. I want to click the button, not think about it, boom, down, 20 seconds later, there it is, on my iPod, works for me. You can go to Amazon, you can go to Spotify, you can go to MySpace, you can go to my YouTube, you can go to Deezer, you can go to We7. There are now 74 fully licensed music services available in the UK to everybody in this room. And by the way, if anybody thinks we're missing something in the market, please come and tell me. If you think there's a way that you want to consume music, we'll do everything we can to give it to you. I am very comfortable with the notion I'll give anybody whatever music they want, on whatever platform they want it, the time and place of their choosing. The only bit I need to worry about is where those people who wish to be paid for their time and effort can get paid for their time and effort. Well, think of market economics. Now, apparently Hardways is going to revolutionise all this. That's what we did. So we know all about party. We don't know how to make funny TV programs, so we made an exception to party, because that's going to teach us how to make funny TV programs. Works for me. Format shifting. Law says if you go to HMV and buy a CD and take it home and put it in your iPod, you broke the law. Bad. Really, really bad. About a month ago, I sent an email to all of the membership of UK Music, and I asked a question. Has any one of you people at any point in time taken any kind of action against any consumer in this country for copying a legitimately acquired CD onto another device? I'm still waiting for the answer, and I wasn't expecting one. You know what? The world's changed, the environment's changed, back to the good management thing. You had a strategy, things have changed, the law needs to change. Good. Can we all now just stop talking about it? Global Repertoire Database. Oh boy, this was very good. There's 2 elements to this. One is that I want to launch Cambridge Law Faculty's TV service. Actually, I'm going to get lots of content, because I love lots of things. So I'm going to have some movies in there and some TV, lots of music, streamed download, by the way, because I just love music. And I might even throw in a few works of art that I can use for screensavers or whatever in the process. But I've got no idea who owns all these things. So I'm going to go to a database online, look it up, and it'll tell me who the rights owner is and who I need to contact. Actually, that's not a bad idea. I can understand that. Because the thing is, the music industry, we quite like databases. Because the thing is, the music industry, for getting on for nearly 100 years now, we've been actually developing away and banging away and building databases. PRS for Music has 60,000 songwriter composer members and about 5,000 music publisher members. They have the details of pretty much every bit of music and every songwriter composer that ever made any bit of money out of any bit of music in the United Kingdom for pretty much getting on for about 100 years. PPL on the record company side has been doing a similar job, I think, for getting on for like 75, 76 years now. So here's the thing about this copyright thing. Under the Another little bit of European legislation, video rental agreement. I, as a performer, am entitled to 50% of the income or equitable remuneration whenever one of my songs is performed in public. Because as you know, there's two rights of the record: the sound recording itself and the song. The songs are dealt with in a very different way. The sound recording is performed in public. The law says the money has to be split between the record company and the people who played on the record. So if any of you have ever been down the studio with one of your mates doing some hand claps on a drunken Friday night, and ended up being a hit, if I was you, I'd go and register with PPL because somebody up there has got 20p that you need to be paid. And guess how we pay all those people? Databases. And curiously enough, for about 3.5 years, the industry has been developing this thing that Nick referred to, called the Global Repertoire Database. At this point, we're looking at a pan-European basis. Because actually, it's a very good thing for industry to be doing, which is why we've been doing it for quite a long time. And clearly, new technology has huge advantages when it comes to things like collecting money, trying to distribute payments. And there is clearly an intent there that it will drive efficiencies, it'll save some costs and overhead somewhere, and ultimately that means more money going back into the songwriters, the composers, the record companies, the music publishers, and everybody involved in the equation. So it's a database. Jolly good thing, we love that. By the way, we've got to, and we're working on this really, really big one. Now, data industry need government, could they come along and tell us that? Clearly not, because we kind of figured that out about 3 years ago, which is why the feasibility's been finished. There's a large global management company in the middle of the scoping project right now. They've got a report back in February next year, and that thing will roll on because it makes commercial sense to do it. It drives efficiencies and savings back to industry. And it was very nice that government felt that they needed to explain that to industry. So you might be told by governments how to do things. Or as somebody said to me the other day, rather wagishly, let's face it, Feargal, if the European governments right now were running their countries and their national economies as well as we run our industry, some European countries wouldn't be in the mess they're in this week. There's a second element to this, and it's for me where it begins to entangle. And that is this notion of a market exchange. There are people who go online to this database, tap in a few details, this is what I want to do, this is the kind of material I want to use, put in my credit card details and print the license out 3 seconds later. It's a nice notion. It really is. Can anybody in this room tell me what is the value of a cloud-based music service? Anybody know? Well, I don't. It was a trick question. I know you don't know. And the reason I know you don't know is because that service was only announced a month ago by Apple in Cupertino. And the reason for that is, a month before that, they didn't know either. Because at that minute in time, negotiating teams from Apple were sitting in offices with negotiating teams from Wexholders for the first time on earth, trying to figure out what the hell the market price might be for something that was going to be a cloud-based music service. So if I even wanted to put that service online and offer you that facility, up until a month ago I couldn't have done it because I couldn't have told you what price I was going to charge you. I want to stream the Olympics. Like somebody's ever going to allow me to go onto a website and suddenly download the broadcasting rights for the Olympic Games? I don't think so. I think the BBC might have a lot to say about that. If the BBC didn't, I think local probably would have a lot to say about it. If they didn't, I think government would have a lot to say about it. If they didn't, I'm pretty damn sure the Olympics organising committee would have an awful lot to say about it. Formula 1 Grand Prix, the FA Cup final. This is a more practical example. Just over a year ago, my board asked me, bless you. Just over a year ago, my board asked me to go and talk to some aggregators and tech companies and ISPs. Because actually we wanted to offer that kind of facility. It's a standard service to help encourage people experimenting with those other words that I love, new business models, whatever the hell that is. But actually to allow people access to content. So they could experiment and actually could start up commercial services. The response I got back was, we don't want to do it, we're not interested. Because the ISPs, the tech companies, The aggregators all wanted their own unique customer added value. They didn't want the same service as the other guy. They were really operating in a fantastically, incredibly competitive market. So we walked away from the idea. So unfortunately, I suspect that government's going to be quite disappointed in all of that. Very quickly, the last thing, the right thing, format shift in music. Anybody know how much that's going to be worth to the British economy? Apparently, according to the government, 2 billion quid. Because apparently, British manufacturers are so nervous and concerned about the uncertainty about allowing people to privately copy things like music. By the way, this might not only apply to music, but films, games, newspapers, movies, whatever. But apparently British manufacturers are so concerned about this that it's actually stalled innovation in British technology companies. Which is kind of pretty strange coming from a British government document. There's this line I'm sure I've covered some part of the course. You can reference a little thing called Amstrad versus CBS in 1989, which I was quite surprised government didn't know about. Particularly since you can find a summary and the details of that case on the Intellectual Property Office's bloody website. So somebody in government could have went and looked up their own soddy website. They would have told them back in 1989, the High Court, then the House of Lords, set a precedent which quite clearly stated a hardware manufacturer is in no way guilty, complacent, responsible for authorising the copying of anything, whether it's from one cassette side of the machine to the second cassette on the other side, or indeed a CD or onto an iPod or anything else. So where's the uncertainty in British manufacturing? There's a High Court judgment that set a huge precedent and has been abided by ever since. It also overlooks the fact that since we're in Cambridge, back in the early 1990s, a little company called Poseidon actually did invent and create what we now know as an MP3 player. The company decided that for investment, capital reasons, there was no market in it, there was no future in it, they decided not to do it. Curiously enough, some of the people from that research and development team have now ended up being the head of hardware and head of mobile in a little company called Apple. Is that actually more of the problem with British industry and British manufacturing than copyright? I suspect it might be. All in all, at the centre of this sits the most remarkable thing of all. In many ways, and I do not mean it disrespectful, makes the rest of this redundant and academic. And that's that remarkable thing called creativity. That remarkable moment in time when someone will sit with a blank sheet of paper, an empty hard drive, an empty computer screen, and create. And creates a moment that elevates, that inspires, that changes humanity. And above all else for me, makes the world within which we live our lives a much more brighter, philosophical, much better, much more endearing, much more cooperative, much more spiritual place within which to live our lives. Music will be there, technology will be there, and the sooner we marry them together, the happier and the better we will all be. My name is Feargal Sharkey. Thank you very much for listening.